Welcome to Learn the Word, the daily Bible teaching program of Calvary Chapel of Delta and Pastor Doug McLean. As we continue our study through the Psalms of Ascent, we've come to Psalm 131, a psalm of simple trust in the Lord. So let's join Pastor Doug for this Psalm of David.
Psalm 120 began a series of 15 psalms that are known as the Songs of Ascent. They were written at different times in history by various people, but they were arranged here together to be sung by those who were going up to Jerusalem, to the temple, for one of their annual feasts. Now, to go to Jerusalem required that you ascend hills and mountains. So physically, you would literally go up. When you say, we're going up to Jerusalem, there was an element of it where you were always ascending. But it was also a mental and a spiritual ascent as well, because they were traveling away from their normal course of daily living, and they were going up to worship. They were going up to focus on the Lord. So it was an ascent for them that was physical. It was an ascent that was mental. You're taking your mind up to higher thoughts. It was an ascent that was spiritual, as you were getting away from those day-to-day things and you were focusing on worshiping the Lord. Now, these Psalms are instructive for us because we're all on an upward journey, not a journey to a physical temple, of course, but a pilgrim journey from who we were to who we will be, from earthly living to heavenly living, to living like everyone else, to living like our Lord Jesus. And we're all on that journey. We're all somewhere. Everyone that's decided to follow Christ is somewhere on that journey. And with that in mind, there are many lessons for us as we go through this. So let's pick up where we left off, and we're looking at the last four of the Songs of Ascent, beginning at Psalm 131, which was written by David. And it begins this way, a song of ascents of David. Lord, my heart is not haughty, nor my eyes lofty, neither do I concern myself with great matters, nor with things too profound for me. David knew that he didn't deserve, nor had he earned, the things that he had, the things that he was enjoying. He never, in a sense, lost the sense of his unworthiness. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, when the Lord promised to make one of his descendants reign over an everlasting kingdom, to make one of his descendants be the Messiah, David responded in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 18 this way. 2 Samuel 7, verse 18, he said, "Who am I, Lord God? Who am I? And what is my house that you have brought me thus far?" He was just amazed what God was promising, what God was doing. He just said, "Who am I?" He never lost sight of the fact that he was Jesse's youngest son, that he was a simple shepherd. I mean, here in the psalm, he said to the Lord, and he could say it truthfully, my heart is not haughty. In other words, my heart is not exalted. He didn't think he was better or more worthy than anyone else. He didn't have an elevated opinion of himself at all. In other words, and he wasn't proud. David was a man that was not proud. A proud person strives against reality in his heart. There's this inner striving because he thinks that he is more than he is. He, in reality, isn't what he thinks he is. And so the proud person tends to be frustrated, angry even at times, maybe resentful, insecure, anxious, because he thinks he's something that he's not. There's expectations because he thinks he deserves things, attention, acknowledgement, what he thinks is fair, what he thinks he deserves. That wasn't David. My heart is not haughty. He said, nor are my eyes lofty, meaning he didn't see He wasn't looking for, he didn't focus on ascending. He wasn't trying to be higher than others. He didn't have these lofty aspirations. He wasn't seeking to be better or to have more than others. That wasn't his focus. My eyes are not lofty. You could say he didn't have selfish ambition. He wasn't one to compare himself with others. Remember, he didn't strive to get Saul's position. Even though he was promised the kingdom, even though he was anointed, and Saul was fueled by envy and trying to kill him, David never took any of the opportunities he had to get rid of Saul. He could have. But you see, David wasn't focused on ascending. He wasn't focused on anything lofty or high. When a person has lofty eyes, he will tend to compare himself to other people and look at other people as the competition. And there's a lack of contentment. And when a person seeks to elevate self, that lofty look will always come at the expense of others. Because if I'm going to be better than them, that means somehow I need to tear them down or exalt myself over them. And so it causes conflict, takes away peace. Remember Jacob? His mother was given the promise by God that Jacob's older brother Esau would serve him, that Esau would serve Jacob. But instead of waiting for the Lord, Jacob had lofty eyes, and he sought to exalt himself. He sought to ascend, and he hurt his brother greatly and forever damaged their relationship. And that's what selfish ambition does. It hurts people. It takes away peace. It creates enemies. So relationship tension, divisions, battles happens when one person is striving to ascend. Now, Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 says, Philippians 2:3, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. We're to value others better than ourselves. Pride and selfish ambition results in a person competing, comparing, and not being content and creating enemies. And we're to do the opposite. We're to esteem others greater than ourselves. Now, similarly, and these are all connected with walking in humility, David didn't allow what he saw as big things or things that were beyond him to have undue influence on him or to distress him or to become his focus. In fact, where he says there, neither do I concern myself with great matters, nor with things too profound for me. The word concern is a word that has to do with going or traveling or walking, following, or behaving. It's a word that's used to describe a person's manner of life. And so the thought is that he wasn't going to allow what he didn't know or what he didn't understand to be the primary influence in the way he lived. That's what he was communicating when he wrote, neither do I concern myself with great matters. He wrote in Psalm 139, verse 6, Psalm 139, 6, he was speaking about the Lord and the Lord's love for him and how the Lord knows his number of the days, his days. And he got to a point where he said, such knowledge is too wonderful to me. It is high. I cannot attain it. And David was okay with that. He was okay with the fact that the Lord's ways are higher than his ways and the Lord's thoughts are higher than his thoughts. He was okay with the Lord's ways being past finding out, as Romans 11:33 says. Romans 11:33. He didn't allow himself to be preoccupied with the mysterious or the speculative. He just rested in what was revealed. He understood the truth of Deuteronomy 29:29. Deuteronomy 29:29 says, the secret thing belongs to the Lord our God, but those things that are revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may do the work of the law. So David was okay with that, living realizing that there were some things that could only be known if they were revealed to him. And he just said, I'm not going to get all caught up in what I don't know or what's too profound for me. I'm just going to respond to what has been revealed to me, what I know. So these are all attitudes of humility. And that attitude of humility has an impact on a person's disposition. We see that. Look at verse 2. He said, surely I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with his mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. Now, inwardly, if your soul is stormy, if you're disturbed internally, then remember this is set in a context. So you go back to verse 1 and you do a pride check. And you say, Lord, show me if I have selfish ambition in my life. Show me if I'm thinking too highly of myself. Show me if I'm getting all caught up in what I don't know. Now, when he said, I have calmed, the word calm is interesting. It's a word that comes from a root that means to make the same. The reason it's translated calmed is because, like in a sea, you have the highs and the lows. You have the waves going up and coming down. So there's a difference between the high and the low, and that's what makes the water rough. And so to calm is to make the same, to smooth it out, to bring stability. He described his soul, his mind, his emotions, his spirit as being like a weaned child with his mother. Now, a nursing child feels a need, a hunger, experiences a lack, and begins to cry and to root around and try to get to his mother's breast. He knows his need and he knows the source. And it seems like nursing babies sometimes are acting like they're wondering if they're ever going to get fed again. And there's just this desperation you see in little babies. They get fussy and they just get irrationally desperate. Now, a weaned child still gets hungry, but he's able to be with his mother in his mother's arms without that rooting, without that desperate cry, but rather he rests in her love, in her care, having become content in her care, her provision, and having become confident in her. In other words, he stops rooting and crying and all that when he learns to trust her. Now, to be calm and quiet is what many are longing for. It's what the world around us is longing for. It's what many Christians are longing for. There's so many books, self-help books about how to have peace, how to get over depression, how to have not have an anxious mind. It's what so many people are looking for. And to many it seems elusive. But if you're unsettled, if there's this storm within you, right here's the key. You ask yourself, is my heart haughty? Am I thinking too much of myself? Are my eyes lofty? Am I focusing on things I don't know instead of just resting in what I do know? And so to calm and quiet your soul, the key is to learn how to trust him, to trust the Lord, and to rest in his provision. And that's what David is calling his people to do there in verse 3. He said, O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forever. Interesting, the word hope could be translated, and indeed it is, about a third of the time translated wait. Hope, wait. It communicates the idea of putting your expectation in the Lord, to wait for him, to hope in him. And that's the key, knowing him, resting in what he provides, looking to him, trusting in him, allowing him to put you where he wants you to be, to give you what he determines, to guide you with what he reveals, to rest in him and who he is, in his ability, in his supply. And that's what David learned, and that's what he was calling his people to embrace. And really that is part of this upward journey, to make it simple, to learn to just trust in the Lord. Psalm 132. It's the longest of the Psalms of Ascent. It's twice as long as the next longest, which was Psalm 122. It's not one written by David, but it's written about David, and it begins this way. A song of ascents. Lord, remember David and all his afflictions, how he swore to the Lord and vowed to the Mighty One of Jacob. So this prayer begins by bringing David's affliction and his commitment, those two things, David's affliction and his commitment, before the Lord. Now again, if you look over David's life, he went through a lot. He suffered a lot of affliction. The youngest son of Jesse left with his sheep. Remember when the prophet came to visit as a shepherd, he faced some serious challenges protecting his father's flock. We know that he had to go up against lions and bears. He referred to that. So even as a young guy, he had to deal with some great adversity. Then even when the Lord began to use him, he defeated Goliath, began to win battles for King Saul. Saul responded by becoming envious of him and trying to kill him repeatedly, chucking spears at him and pursuing him. And David ended up living for a long time on the run and had a lot of unfulfilled promises, had his own tribe, the people of Judah, betray him several times. And then even as he ascended to the throne, as the Lord brought him, as Saul was killed in his battle with the Philistines and David became king eventually, he had more problems. He had family problems. He had lost a child, an infant. We know he had a son that raped his half-sister, David's daughter. We know that his other son ended up murdering him. Absalom murdered Amnon. And then Absalom, that son, led a rebellion against his father. And then his most trusted counselor, Ahithophel, jumped in and supported that rebellion. So David went through some serious affliction in his life. But through it all, his driving desire was not self-preservation. His driving desire was not any selfish ambition. Instead, he was committed to the Lord. He swore to the Lord. He vowed to the Mighty One of Jacob, the God of grace. Whenever you see the God of Jacob referenced, like we see here, the Mighty One of Jacob, always think grace. Remember, Jacob had another name. His name was Israel. His name became Israel. Jacob means supplanter or heel catcher, or kind of the one that's striving. And you look at Jacob's story when he was Jacob, he wasn't worthy of God's work at all, yet God worked for him and on him by his grace. So whenever you see Jacob referred to as connected with God, like we see the Mighty One of Jacob, think of the God of grace. And David was committed to the Mighty One of Jacob. And he says there that he swore to the Lord. He made this commitment to the Lord. And in verse 3, we get to see it. This is the commitment. Surely I will not go into the chamber of my house or up to the comfort of my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the Mighty One of Jacob. So David committed to the Lord, not seeking an easy life for himself, not seeking comfort or even safety for himself, but he was seeking to find a place for the Lord. And you can see this in 2 Samuel chapter 6 and 2 Samuel chapter 7. There's two aspects to this. The first was his desire to get the Ark of the Covenant into the center of the nation, to bring the Ark into Jerusalem, into the center of their national life. And then the second part of it was to build a house for the Lord. He wasn't concerned about his personal comfort. He was accepting what God was providing, but he had these great intentions to bring the ark in and to build a house for the Lord. The ark, the reason he was so passionate about it is the ark was the place where God had promised to meet his people and speak to his people. In fact, he said to Moses concerning the ark in Exodus 25:22, Exodus 25:22, concerning the ark, he said, "And there I will meet with you, and there I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim, which are the on the ark of the testimony about everything which I will give you in commandment to the children of Israel. And so this was a key place where God was saying, this is the place. If you want to come and meet with me, this is the place. If you want to hear from me, this is the place. And when David was finally made king, the ark was not the center of the national life. In fact, for years, the ark wasn't the priority of his people at all. In other words, the people had stopped prioritizing meeting with God and hearing from God. And David had it in his heart to change that. He was committed to finding a place for the Lord. And he was willing to sacrifice to fulfill his mission. Look at verse 6. He said, "Behold, we heard of it in Ephrathah. We found it in the fields of the woods." Interesting. Now, when they lost the ark, they lost it to the Philistines. It was Hophni and Phinehas who took the ark into the battle with the Philistines. They tried to use the ark like a charm. They thought that if we bring the ark in, then we're bringing God into the situation, and somehow we're going to win the battle. And they failed, and the Philistines captured the ark, and the Philistines had quite a hard time with the ark until they eventually returned it. And when the men of Beth Shemesh found it, they foolishly opened it. No one was supposed to touch the thing. Well, they opened it and looked inside. They did what they were forbidden to do, and thousands died. You read all this in 1 Samuel chapter 4 through 1 Samuel chapter 6. And the ark ended up at a place called Kirjath Jearim. And Kirjath Jearim means the city of forests. And so there's a connection here, as the psalmist here is saying, they found it. They heard about it in Ephrathah, which is the community around Bethlehem, but then they found it in the fields of the woods. That's a reference to Kirjath Jearim. That's where they found it. Look at verse 7. He continues. He said, "Let us go into his tabernacle. Let us worship at his footstool. Arise, O Lord, to your resting place, you and the ark of your strength." Now, before they lost the ark to the Philistines, they kept the ark in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle. And they looked at that place and the ark as the footstool of the Lord. In other words, the place where the Lord condescended and connected with the earth. It was the one way that God had given to approach him in that age, was to come to the ark. So David initially put the ark into a tent in Jerusalem. He put it into a tabernacle, as it's mentioned here, verse 7, a tent that he had prepared for it. Now, it took 2 tries. The first time David attempted to move it, he tried to move it the same way the Philistines returned it, on a cart. And it was a disaster. And as a result of that, he consulted the word and he moved it biblically. Look at 1 Chronicles 13 and 1 Chronicles 15. 13 is the failure, 15 is the success. And the next verses seem to connect with the successful move into the city. You'll see why I'm saying that. Look at verse 9. He said, "Let your priests be clothed with righteousness, and let your saints shout for joy." 1 Chronicles 15 tells us when they discovered the right way to do things, the priests sanctified themselves. They cleansed themselves ceremonially before moving the ark. They had consulted the Lord about the proper way to move the ark. And so here you see the priest being clothed with righteousness. They're doing it the right way. They've been sanctified. And then as they're moving things the right way, as they're clothed in righteousness, then the people are shouting for joy. Now, in the failed attempt, which they tried earlier, that celebration that David had orchestrated, it ended abruptly because they had put the ark on a cart and the ox stumbled, and a man named Uzzah tried to stabilize the ark. And as soon as he put his hand on the ark, he died on the spot. And that celebration that David had orchestrated came to an end. in contrast here, it's referring to how the priests sanctified themselves. They moved the ark God's way, and when they did it the right way, the celebration continued, and the saints shouted for joy. And so there was a responsibility to do God's work God's way, and in that, there was joy.
You've been listening to the message, The Upward Journey, from Psalms 131 through 134. If you'd like to hear this message again, or listen to more from Pastor Doug, you can find it on the official Calvary Chapel of Delta mobile app. Just search for CC Delta in your app store to download it today. And be sure to join us next time to continue to learn the Word.